All right. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Real Estate Recess. I'm Jennifer Schurter, and kicking it off here today, it is Thursday, February 20th, 2025. And with me today, I'm pleased to have Tyson Lewis joining me today from New York City. Tyson, why don't you tell the people who you are and exactly where you're from? Because I know New York City is more than just the big city. You probably don't sell the entire city. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I wish I did. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Tyson Lewis. I'm a real estate broker with Compass in New York City. I've been an agent here for about 17 years, and I've lived in the city for about 25 years. First in Manhattan, and for the last 20 years, I've lived in Brooklyn. I have a team of 7 agents kind of scattered across the city, but my business personally focuses on Brooklyn and a good part of Manhattan.
That is very cool. So what is it like to live in Brooklyn or Manhattan? It's so foreign to me. I've never been to New York. So, and for somebody like me where I live, I grew up on a farm, a small town. It's just different. And so give me a picture of what it's like to live and work where you do.
Yeah, well, I grew up in a small town and I never wanted to live in the city. So it's kind of strange that I'm here now, but it feels like home to me. I mean, there's a lot of people and you can definitely feel the proximity of everybody around you on a day-to-day basis, but it's something you just get used to. And I think when you live in the city, you think about space a different way. I grew up with a lot of space. I still go out and visit my parents, and they have like 13 acres, and I walk around the woods. But
Nice.
A lot of our living here happens outside of the walls of our apartment or our house, and the amenities and the restaurants and the entertainment and the museums and the music and all the stuff that we have access to on a daily basis. Which, by the way, sometimes I take for granted and I forget, and I have to remind myself that this is why I live here. But all of that is constant. And so we do a lot of living outside of our homes. And so, I frequently get someone relocating to the city from a small town, and they're shocked at how little space their money buys.
I bet.
But I don't know, you just start thinking about space in a different way when you live here. And I love it. I love the energy of it. I love restaurants, so this is a great place for me. Yeah.
That's awesome. And that's one thing I have heard from several people is the energy is unmatched. Just having something going on everywhere all the time, walking downstairs and having everything you kind of need kind of right there in a close proximity. Not having to drive to a grocery store where I grew up, it was like, we had to drive, 15 minutes to get to the grocery store in the nearest town. And so, it's just so interesting. It's just different. I don't know.
I will say it's very hard to generalize about New York City. It's a really, really big place. So I don't even know what the population is now, but so, New York City has Brooklyn and Manhattan and the Bronx and Queens and Staten Island. And I live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn itself would be the 4th biggest city in the United States if it was its own city. It's bigger than Chicago itself. And that's not even taking into account Manhattan and Queens and the other boroughs. So it's really, really hard to just generalize. When people think of New York City, I think they think of Manhattan. Like what you see in the movies is Manhattan typically, and big skyscrapers and all of that. And that's right over there. You can't see it, but I can see it.
Yeah.
But New York is so much more than that. So Brooklyn has, every neighborhood is like a small town unto itself. Every neighborhood has its own character and personality and its own vibe. And some of them are closer to subways, some are not. And all of them have very rich, interesting histories. So you can really live a lot of different ways here, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Wow. That is pretty awesome. I I always love to hear, especially from people who are different parts of the country, even other states, just, living in the country in a different state is different. Living in a city is different between two places. It's just fascinating. We have such a huge country that we take it for granted.
Yeah.
But the lifestyles, the culture, everything can be so varied and so different. So that's pretty awesome.
Sure.
So on our agenda today, Tyson, we're going to talk about the housing market because there's never enough data and information. I happened to come across an article through U.S. News that talks about their 5-year projections, trying to combine that into one word, their 5-year prediction for what's going to happen in the housing market over the next several years. And, we can talk about the main points and do we agree or disagree? Do we think that those are reasonable? And if we'll talk it through. And then we'll just kind of talk about, I always like to revisit this every once in a while because there are people out there, i.e. trolls, that often like to comment about, well, the housing market's going to crash. Don't buy a house now because the market's going to crash. And we're going to talk about the fact or fiction of that. And is that a reality, or is it a complete non-starter, or is the truth really somewhere in the middle? So we're going to talk about that. And then finally, we're going to talk about some challenges we're experiencing right now. For me, especially, is with home buyers. And so we'll talk about those. And Tyson, you can talk about what experiences you're having with clients and those challenges. And
Sure.
We'll brainstorm ways and talk about ways to overcome them so that those folks out there who are watching, there are some solutions out there when things are challenging to make something happen. All right. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's look at this first article. I'll share it. And this is something that you can find on your own if you're out there. This particular article, as I mentioned, is from U.S. News and World Report. And if you search for this article, 2025 to 2029, 5-year housing market predictions. So here's the byline. The next 5 years will likely usher in slower increases in both home prices and rents. All right. So what do you think about that? Slower growth in home prices and rent. Do you think that is going to be applicable to your market, Tyson?
No, I don't. I mean, again, New York is a big place, but if I just talk about where I work generally, the median sale price, the median home value has gone up pretty steadily every year since like the 70s when they started really tracking these things. And so, now granted, I live in an area where that's tends to be like insulated from broader market trends. Some of these neighborhoods inventory is always very low and always in demand. So maybe that's not a good indicator, but at least where I work, I don't know what would have to happen for demand for housing to not continue to go up and for values to not go up.
Right. Well, and for you specifically in your area, it's still a hub. A lot of people want to be in the city. They want to be close to that action, the energy, exactly what we talked about when we first got started today. And that's the business and the industry and the arts and culture scene and things that people want to be close to. It's just New York City is a hub. And so there's always going to be some demand. It would have to be what would they call it? A black swan event, or like one of those, like a big catastrophic thing to happen.
Catastrophic. Yeah.
Which is scary to think about, right? Like to think that would take something like that to happen, and nobody wants that to happen.
Right.
At least
but let me just say, we've already had some things.
Yes.
I mean, and New York City suffered from the pandemic, like a lot of places did, but it also rebounded very quickly. And so did the surrounding areas. So the areas immediately, like within an hour or two of New York City, it really just, I won't say it wasn't impactful, but it definitely was almost like just a little small blip on the long trajectory of growth.
Right.
So I don't know what catastrophic event would have to happen, but for sure, if it does happen, I would want to have a place to live.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And so I agree with that. Here in Oregon, and folks who listen or tune in to this podcast know that a week ago or so I talked about the Oregon, oh gosh, what was it called? It's like the Office of Economic Analysis or something, had their first annual report. First time they've ever done this. The Governor Kotek has an initiative that she's working on in the state, which is to improve the housing situation here. So clearly this goes hand in hand with that. And so according to that report, to call into memory for those folks, basically we need to build between 29,500 and 30,000 homes per year. And if memory serves, that's over the next 30 years. We have to build that. So we don't have enough now. We are still, yes, more houses have come to market here in Oregon, but we haven't seen a huge dump of houses. We're sitting at, I think, 3.7 months of inventory. So for those who don't know, that means it would take 3.7 months to sell everything on the market if nothing else hit the market at all. And generally, it's understood that anything less than 6 months means that it's still a seller's market. Have things moderated for buyers a little bit? Yeah, there's more to choose from, but not much more. So I just don't, between what this report shows and kind of the conditions of where we're at in the market now, I don't really see ours softening or slowing down all that much. There'd have to be some pretty dramatic things that change in the next 4 to 5 years for that prediction and that byline to even be a reality here.
Yeah. And similarly here, I mean, we're not without our housing challenges, and anyone who follows the news knows that New York is trying, they're calling it a housing crisis, that there's just not enough housing. And particularly for the people that kind of are the backbone of the city, the people who work in the service industry and have jobs that don't pay enough for them to buy property here. And that's the big challenge and the big crisis that they're trying to deal with. I think here there's definitely room to build and add more housing. The question is, will they keep it affordable enough for the people who need it?
Right.
And that's the big unanswered question at the moment.
And I would agree with that here too. I mean, affordability that's the biggest concern, and workforce housing in a lot of these areas is really hard to come by. So even in my small town where I live, a huge portion of the workforce commutes in from smaller towns. They drive in from Salem, which is about 40 miles to where I live. So, that's a pretty big drive to commute, to go to work every day. But that's where they can afford to live. And you need a workforce that has a quality of life as well. So it's a very important balance. Absolutely. So then the other key takeaways, we're not going to read through the whole article, but if you want to investigate more for yourself, we're just going to talk about these key takeaways. So we're not talking about this article for an hour. But so the key takeaways in here are the sales of existing homes will grow moderately as buyers become accustomed to higher prices and mortgage rates. But if rates decline, transactions will go up. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, sure, if there's any significant reduction in interest rates, it will fuel the buyer's activity. But I also think that, and I think we've observed this over the last year, is interest rates were going up every few weeks, every month in 2023 for most of it, and on into the beginning of 2024, and then for the end of 2024 they kind of stabilized a little bit. They're much higher than what people are used to, but at least they weren't fluctuating that much. And as we've come into the new year, they actually went down a tiny little bit, I think, but they have not fluctuated that much. I think that buyers really just want to see that the rates are stable.
Yes.
Not that they don't want low rates. Of course, everybody wants low rates, but it's really important that people see that they just stay put, so they could make a plan and have it, know what they're looking at, know what their buying power is, and when they're moving around all the time, it's really hard to do that. And and that, I think that really exhausted a lot of buyers over the last couple of years. which I'm sure will lead into our later conversation about buyer activity. But this, yeah. And I don't know, we always hear the predictions about, rates are going to go down, rates are going to go down. I mean, anyone who thinks that they know, I think doesn't know what they're talking about, or they just want a headline. Like, I don't know. I've been doing this 17 years. I have a great business. I have no idea if rates are going to go down or not. Probably.
Oh my gosh. Well, and absolutely. And so another key take, bottom one here, says that mortgage rates will likely range from about 6 to 7% unless there's a recession, but short-term lending rates will continue falling through 2026. So I think that is pretty spot on. If we could make a prediction about it, 6 to 7% seems reasonable. If we hit 6.5, that would be a huge win. From coming from just over 7%. And that would really help a lot of some affordability challenges for some folks out there looking to make a move. But I'm with you. I know last year there was a lot of talk that by the end of 2024 we would see an interest rate with a 5 in front of it.
Yeah.
That never happened. I mean, we got to the low 6s, I think, for like a blip, like a very short window in around October, September. And I remember that because I have a client who purchased a home and they were able to lock their rate exactly when that happened. So the timing was perfect for them when that was all going on. They were going to buy regardless, but that was just kind of the cherry on top of the sundae for them. But I think that as we start to see stability, I 100% agree. That is the one thing where I'm like, if they could just stabilize and give people some just room to be like, okay, this is what it is. We're not seeing wild fluctuations. Yes. And then you can plan around that. But when they're fluctuating 0.25% and going back and forth and all these things happening, it makes it really hard for the average person to just get their head around what's happening and how to financially plan for some of these things.
Yeah. And one of the things that I'm talking to my buyers, and I have my team, I keep hammering home with these guys, is, this is a wonderful time to be a buyer.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I mean, I don't know, would you rather pay a little bit more on your mortgage now and then refinance like a year from now if rates do go down significantly, or would you rather pay in our market $100,000 more for that same property? I don't know. I know what I'd rather do, but and I think it's just about buyer mentality. It's about like giving perspective, especially in our job. It's a big part of our job is just giving perspective. When I started, I'm in the early 2000s, I think rates were around 10 or 11%.
Oh my goodness.
And then then in 2008, 2009, the country was in crisis and rates started coming down and they went down to 7%, and people were like, oh my God, it's historic. This will never happen again. Okay. And then a few months later it was 5%. And people were like, oh my God, it's historic. This will never happen again. And then
2020 said, hold my beer.
Right. And then I locked a rate at 2.25% during COVID. So it's like, it's all about perspective. If you look at history, 6.5% is not crazy.
No.
And if you buy down some points and you get creative with your mortgage, I just had somebody locked 5.3% on an adjustable rate. It's great.
Yeah, that is great. That's absolutely great. So interesting point on this key takeaway. And yes, and I agree to all of that. Which we can talk more about some solutions. You alluded to something there I think is really important, and that's buying down points. That is one way that buyers can overcome some of these challenges. So we'll come back to that. So hold that thought, because I think that's a really, really important point, talking about how to navigate the issues and the challenges that buyers are facing today. But on one of these key takeaways I thought was really interesting is the new policies on real estate commissions and the sharings of home listings. What they're talking about is pocket listings, where there's they call it clear cooperation, where the idea is they want to take away the option of a home buyer or a homeowner to say, we're not ready or we don't want to list our property publicly. We want an agent to help us find a buyer, but we want it to be a pocket listing. So there's some talk about whether or not to do away with that type of a practice. So it's curious because you mentioned when we were talking before the show started that in New York, where you're at, you don't have an MLS and you're not a member of NAR. So tell us how that works where you're at.
Well, that's right. There are a couple different MLSs within New York City. In my market, which is Manhattan and the western half of Brooklyn, and just remember Brooklyn's huge. So
Yeah.
none of the major companies, the major brokerages use an MLS. It exists, but nobody has that. I don't even have access to it. I wouldn't even know how to do that. I think our listings feed into an MLS that some brokers from other areas can see, but we can't see it. So, and I'm also licensed in Connecticut. And so I do use an MLS there. And so I can see the value of it. And I'm also a realtor because I'm in Connecticut.
Right.
But in New York City, there is an organization called the Real Estate Board of New York, and they developed a system that's sort of like an MLS that we all feed our listings into. It's supposed to be a centralized database that operates in a similar fashion to the MLS, but only the companies that are members of the Real Estate Board of New York can see it, and not all of them are. So if I use that system to search for, one of my buyers, for example, there's no way for me to be sure that I'm seeing all of the inventory that's out there. And so we've just gotten used to, sometimes there's like a little mom and pop real estate brokerage that literally has listings on a note card in their window. And sometimes you just got to go and look, not so dramatic as that. Usually there's usually a website, but we get used to like looking in different places for listings. And no, we're not members of NAR. Some parts of New York City are, but we're not.
Yeah, very interesting. And out here, a lot of brokerages require we have to be a member of NAR to be with the brokerage, or even to have access to the MLS. So there's that marriage of the two where we have to be the NAR member, like it or not. And I know there's been some, a lot of folks are frustrated with everything that has gone on in the news in the last year. To anybody who's paid attention to that is aware that, there's been a lot of conversation and talk, agent community about that. But as far as regionally, since in August, to bring everybody back, for those who aren't in the know, there was an industry shift that happened back in August, where if you were a member of the National Association of Realtors, you then had to make sure that you had a signed buyer representation agreement. So between myself as an agent and a buyer, we would have to have that agreement signed that said, yes, Jennifer is representing us in this purchase. We have an agreement of how much she will be paid. And then in January of this year, the first of the year, it became law in the state of Oregon. So it was going to happen anyway. So anybody who has a license now has to have a buyer representation agreement in order to represent a buyer. So it's very interesting, the changes. But I will say, since that happened, so far, granted, it hasn't been in effect for a long time. It's felt very much like business as usual. I feel like people understand the flow of the transaction better, and they better understand how I am paid as a real estate agent. It's not just like there's a money tree that exists somewhere on a mountain and we shake it after the transaction closes, and then that's how I get paid as a buyer's agent. That's not what happens. So I feel like that I don't know that how this is going to play out in the long term. I don't have a crystal ball, but at least in the short term, what I've seen is that it has been a much more open and honest conversation with buyers because of this. And I feel like it's been better in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that a lot of the conversation that happened over the last couple of years has been really unfortunate. And but one of the good things that came out of it, I do think that a lot of buyers enter into this a little bit confused as to how it works. And I think that agents historically have not done a great job of explaining their role. I mean, some do obviously, but I think in general, I think there's been a little bit of uncertainty as to how we get paid. And, even, 3 years ago, I'd have a buyer go, wait, do I pay you? Or how do you get, and I'd be like, no, this is how it works. And so, for us, we had to start doing our buyer's agreements in January of this year. And I had never done one. My team was all out doing them like a year ago because they saw this coming, but I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it until they make me.
So
I was like, I have a special relationship with my buyers. I don't need to have that. I was hoping that maybe they change their minds.
Right.
But then, once I was forced to do it, it makes it's only weird if you make it weird. Like,
Totally.
and so if you really, I mean, you're engaging on no one's buying a home for fun. The stakes are very high. And you're at this point where something big is happening in somebody's life. And it's not weird to have a very serious conversation about it and why they're engaging you as an agent and what your duty to them is. And, I have not had really, I've had lots of questions, but I haven't had any pushback on signing buyer representation agreements yet.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll happen, but.
I'm sure it will too. I have had, the buyers I'm working with have been great, and we've talked it through and understood, but so far I haven't had anybody say, well, I want to work with multiple agents or, anything like that, which I think would be challenging. But,
what do you think you would say if they did?
So it's it's hard to say. I think it depends on a situation, but I would say, how about this? Why don't you give me a shot exclusively for X amount of time and let's see how it goes. And if you're truly unhappy and you would rather have multiple people looking out for the same thing, that's fine. We all see the stuff that's on the market now. It's just, what's somebody going to do to help you locate a property that's off market? And are they going to do that without a guarantee that if they identify it, that you're actually going to want to work with them? Because that's going to, in our area where a lot of things are listed on the MLS, we don't have, and I'm sure they're out there, but I'm not aware of the mom and pop type situations like you have, where it's just like you have to go, there's different ways of finding those things. Networking with other agents, or I do a lot of outbound as well for buyers. So mailings, like buyer needs social media posts or things like that to try to get things that, especially when there's a very specific need that we need to try to identify. It takes a little bit more than just, well, here's a drip campaign or here's an email for you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, with your properties that you want to look at that are good possibilities. So yeah, I don't know. It's tough. It's a tough question. I guess every situation is going to be different, but
yeah. I mean, I think that I would, and I actually kind of have this conversation already. I kind of say, look, this is a big decision, and I understand we just met, and you can see my credentials, but we might not get along. We might not like working together. We don't know. So, let's sort of date before we get married, and we'll do agreement for 2 weeks, and we'll just go out. We'll see some properties, see if we like working together, see if, like a vibe check. We could even do it for 1 week, go out on a Sunday, look at some open houses, and then if we liked working together, we can continue. And if not, that's okay. And I think when you put it like that, like they have the choice.
Yeah, 100%.
You put it like that, then, it's like they get to test drive you.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be this big, it's not this big scary thing, because you hear agreement or you hear contract, and and I can see how that would kind of set you back on your heels a little bit of like, well, hold on here. I mean, I have to be in agreement to work with you exclusively. It sounds like you're being locked into something, but if that agent is any good at their job, they're going to explain exactly what it means and exactly how you can exit that agreement if you are unhappy. If this person turns out to be a dud that's representing you, obviously you're going to want an out. Or if it turns out you're really not a good fit. So it doesn't have to be this big scary thing, but it is something that protects everybody involved and sets a standard and sets expectations for both parties, both the clients being served and the agents who are working on behalf of those clients, so that everybody's in agreement and everybody understands, and it's on paper, which for those who weren't using it before, we didn't really have that. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm going to get paid by, the agent's going to get paid at closing and it's not going to cost me anything. Well, it's important to dispel that. And that's what these agreements do. And it doesn't have to be scary.
Do you find in your market, are most sellers offering compensation to a buyer's agent? Has that shifted at all for you guys?
So I would say I've only seen a couple instances where the seller has out and out said, I'm not willing to help pay anything to what the buyer might owe their agent for their services. It has been most commonly I have seen, which I think is and rightfully so, is bring us your offer and tell us what you need, and we're going to consider the whole entire picture of the offer and negotiate from there. And we have a form in Oregon where we can include that says, hey, the client needs X% towards their buyer agent cost, whether for paying their agent, and then it gets negotiated from there. But it's being considered as the overall offer than just, hey, the seller's is willing to pay this much, which I think it's just easier to just give an offer with what we're asking for.
Yeah. I mean, I go back and forth on it. Like here, we can't necessarily track everything. We don't have MLS, so we don't have a way to get great data. But my company is huge, and we do a good job of tracking. At least within our company, we have a big market share, and it's very clear that the vast majority of sellers in New York City are offering compensation to a buyer's agent, and maybe they're offering a little bit less than they might have if it was a 50-50 split. But almost nobody is offering nothing. But again, like you said, like when an offer comes in, it doesn't necessarily have to reflect the commission that's being offered. I'm sorry, we're not allowed to call it commission anymore. The compensation that's being offered.
Yes, redacted.
and then it's on the listing agent, the seller's agent, to really give them perspective and make them see the big picture and help them crunch the numbers. And especially if you have multiple offers that are competing, I had one seller who really didn't want to pay a very high commission, and he never has. He's challenging, let's just say. And we had multiple offers, and I was trying to factor in the amounts of the compensation that were being asked, because they're all over the place, into the total. And once he saw it on paper and he started crunching the numbers, he changed his tune real fast. He's like, "Oh, that's $100,000 more than that other offer. I'll definitely compensate that agent."
Right.
But I think it makes the listing agent have to work a little bit harder, and which maybe is a good thing for this business. I mean, we have a lot of agents. No offense, I don't like to be negative, but we do have a lot of agents who kind of just phone it in and aren't really, that engaged in the process, or don't know the things that they should know. And I think that all of this could potentially elevate the business.
I couldn't agree more. I think the entry into real estate is easy, so it's accessible for people to become an agent, to do this job, right? To get your license and to say, but in practice, and it is much different than the theory of becoming a real estate agent, and the learning curve and all the things you have to do to be proficient and be good at this. And that shows, maybe you saw it, but there was a post making the rounds on social media not all that long ago that said something like 74% or 76%, something like that. 70-some% of agents in the United States did not sell a single home last year.
I did see that, yeah.
And that is, so really, what is it? Let's say it's 25% of all agents were the ones in the country who actually did any amount of volume. between, one house and whatever, 20 or whatever the numbers were. But it's true. I mean, there's so many factors to consider as an agent when you're working, buyers' needs and sellers and the negotiations and how to do that, two different ball games from either side. And so there really is a lot that you really do have to work. You really have to have the conversations, and
God forbid.
yeah, I know we have to pick up a phone and talk to somebody. but it does. Rapport is the easiest. That is one of the first things I try to do, is establish rapport with the other agent, because it makes that negotiation go so much better if you can just have some type of conversation, and it just makes things better. So yeah, but you're right.
That's a really good point. And I was thinking about that when we were talking about explaining the buyer representation agreements to a buyer, and what our duties are, and why you should not work with multiple agents, why you should sign on with me. This business is so much based on relationships. My relationships with the other top agents in my marketplace definitely do give my buyers an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
We get intel earlier, we get feedback earlier, we might get early access to a property. I might hear about something coming up a week before it hits the market. And if it comes down to a negotiation and there are multiple offers, I might be more successful negotiating with somebody that I know than an agent who comes that they don't know.
Yeah.
And so,
Exactly.
it's just the relationships are so important in this business.
Mm-hmm. I agree. We are a people business at the end of the day. Like, we work with people, and there's a whole variety of people out there, but at the end of the day, it's still a people-centered business, and we have to be able to have and cultivate relationships. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So let's revisit these. So the bottom line is that, yes, we think prices will continue to grow because there's still not enough supply. Mortgage rates will probably settle between 6% and 7%. I'd say that's accurate, 100%. And then there's other varying factors that could come into play with national rules. Like, we just don't know. It's hard to put a finger on exactly what's going to happen there. But I think as an industry and as practitioners of real estate, we're pretty resilient, and we'll figure out a way to make things happen and make it as easy for our clients as possible. And then one thing we didn't talk about was that, newly built homes, they are going to be where the new inventory is going to be coming from. Of course, that goes without saying.
Yep.
Yeah. So any closing thoughts on that? I think we covered it.
Nope. I think we covered it.
Super. So this is just a quick thing. The next topic to talk about has to do with the crash, going back to 2008 and what things were like then. And something I hear a lot is an objection, mostly from trolls online. And every once in a while, I like to take a second and say, okay, is this truth, or is this a complete false viewpoint? Or is the truth somewhere in the middle? And so are we looking at a situation right now where we're going to see a crash a la 2008? And so anyway, what are your thoughts to that question, or to that thought of that the market's gonna crash?
I'm not an expert, but the crash in 2008 happened because banks were acting irresponsibly. And I think that's exactly the opposite of what's happening right now. They're very, very strict on their loaning practices. So I'm not sure what this person is suggesting, but that type of crash, I don't see that happening.
Right.
Unless somebody's seeing something that I'm not seeing. Buyers are the pre-approval process, the qualification process is very rigorous with banks right now. So that's why that crash happened.
Yes. Oh, 100%. And I can speak from experience. I was not in the real estate business in that time frame, but we did buy our first house and we received one of those loans. We were probably those people that shouldn't have received a loan. And it was like, oh, here you go. Here's an 80-20. So 80% was the mortgage. The 20% was a separate loan for our down payment. And between the two loans, we were paying about 14% interest. Well, if we add it together, one was 6.25 and one was 8.5. So we were paying a lot of interest between those two loans. And within the next year, the market had crashed and we lost $100,000 in value on our property. And that was really a frightening thing. But we made it. We made it through.
You made it, but a lot of people didn't make it, and
a lot of people did.
and those, and it was shocking to me some of the stories that I heard, but I just I don't see that happening at this point. I think they've learned the lesson.
Yeah, and I agree about that. Crash was caused by the banks being very irresponsible. Now it's like you say, it's so rigorous. They do such a deep dive into a buyer's financial records and scour through their bank statements and financial documents and employment verifications and all of those things. It's nothing short of like, oh, we need a HIPAA waiver because now we're going to look at that too. But they really do a deep dive into who the history financially of those individuals. But so in that regard, we also had a tremendous amount of inventory here in Oregon when the market crashed in 2009. I think it was January or February, if I'm not mistaken. The graph I saw, we had something like 19 months of inventory. So over a year and a half's worth of houses on the market. Yeah. And so there's also a glut of inventory. We were way overbuilt. And so that is kind of where that bubble really came from. And so as far as now, I mean, if we look at here, I'll share my screen because I have this, I'll show something. This is an Altos report for Portland, Oregon. And what I like about these is they are updated every week. And so it will show us how many houses are on the market. And so down here in inventory in Portland, Oregon, so it's obviously we're looking at all of Portland, not just a certain zip code. There's about 906 homes on the market. And our inventory, again, for the Portland Metro is 3.7 months. So if we compare that to the crash years when we had 19 months of inventory, we technically are still at a shortage. And so what is it because the prices are higher? Yes, but that's an inflationary response. That's not because there's an artificial demand or something like that that's being fabricated. Some, however, may argue the whole BlackRock buying houses and whatever. Is that happening? I haven't seen it. I'm sure it does. It hasn't been my personal experience, though I'm sure it is happening out there. But I just don't see this glut of inventory plus unfortunate bank practices that could be leading to something greater that would cause a 2008 style crash in the market. I'm just not, the best data that I'm seeing doesn't show any of that.
No, I agree with that.
Okay, yeah. So now that we can check that box, the check-in on when's the market going to crash. So anyway, what are your thoughts out there, people? Is the market going to crash? Leave a comment. Hot take, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that you'll be waiting for 10 more years and then we'll check in again and it still wouldn't have happened. Not at the rate we're at. All right, so finally, buyer challenges. New York and Oregon. It's probably some similarities, probably some differences. What would you say when you're working with buyers, Tyson, would be your biggest challenges? Or what are you seeing right now in your world?
The biggest challenges right now, well, for all our talk about interest rates and how they're not actually that bad, it is an obstacle for some people, obviously. I mean, in New York City, a lot of our inventory is apartments, condos, and co-ops. I don't know if you guys have co-ops in Portland, but There are just apartments and buildings, and one-bedroom apartments and studio apartments have really suffered from the interest rate, from the higher rates, because I guess people in general who buy those types of properties tend to be more affected by, a difference of a few $100s a month on their mortgage. In some of the more affluent neighborhoods here, we don't see much of an effect. So, but for sure, interest rates are still a thing. And it's a conversation I have every single time I meet a new buyer. It's, we're waiting for this, we're waiting for that. And like I said before, like, I'd rather buy now and then refinance, but it is definitely a challenge for some people. Here in New York, inventory has been a big challenge. Inventory has been one of the biggest factors for the past year, because last year, not only did we have interest rate fluctuations, but we had an election, which I'm not going to talk about politics, but regardless of your politics, it's a distraction. And it's definitely a big, it tends to be disruptive for real estate until it's over. And a lot of buyers last year got really exhausted by all of the noise, the NAR stuff, all that stuff, the election, the interest rates, it really felt like the last quarter of 2024 buyers were exhausted and they just needed a holiday.
Yes.
And for that reason, a lot of people who were thinking about selling last year, if they didn't need to sell, decided to hold off. And so we have, it's like the beast that keeps feeding itself. We had very low inventory, and only right now is it starting to, sellers are like, wow, buyers are out there, we should hit the market, So hopefully it's going to be a really busy spring, but the inventory thing has been a really big challenge for us here.
Yeah, and I would agree. I have had some first-time home buyers I've been working with recently where finding something that's an appropriate price point for them that's achievable is so difficult. And it's heartbreaking, because here's some people that work really hard and they have started families and they want something that's their own. And I tell them, look, like right now, your best bet may not be to buy. If maybe you need to just save more money, pay down some debt, and put yourself in the best possible position. And that might mean you need to rent for a little while. There's zero shame in that. I always tell people, do not feel bad if you have to rent. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or you're failing in life or whatever it is. You have to take that boomer idea out of the equation here, because the situation that we're dealing with is so different from generations in the past, where they could have the house. They had their forever home at 25 and it was 2,500 square feet on half an acre lot, and like the American dream. It's just, things have changed so much. And so finding inventory for buyers that are the starter homes at a price that's reasonable is so hard. So what I've been working with is saying, okay, how long are you going to be? What's your plan for this place? By and large, most people who buy for the first time, this isn't their forever home. It's a place to get started and to enter the market. So maybe we need to retool on our expectations. Is this a 5 to 7 year house where you can get in, build equity, and use that as leverage to the next step? Could be the thing that's more in line with what you want now or what might work better long term. But in the meantime, you have to take that first step, and that second in line house is going to just be out of reach, and you might be able to do it, but do you want to? Is it going to put you in a position where you're house poor, basically, where you can't even you can't take the kids to McDonald's on Friday night because you feel overburdened and you can't even have a lifestyle. So we have those conversations a lot, is being open-minded to things. If that monthly payment is that important factor for them. And then also earlier you brought up rate buy downs. Is that something that you're finding your buyers are doing a lot?
Yeah, it's happening a lot right now. And I strongly recommend certain mortgage brokers and bankers because they're way better at explaining how that works than I am.
Right.
But it is something that that a lot of people are taking advantage of. And I think a lot of agents don't really understand. I mean, I will confess, when it first started happening, I didn't know much about it, and I had to educate myself really quickly, because it's a great way to cut down your monthly payments, and maybe it makes something more affordable. If you just think outside the box a little bit, don't just give up don't just type in the numbers on a Zillow mortgage calculator and assume you can't afford that property. Right. If you're close, there may be a way around it. Right. And the other thing I was thinking here, I had this conversation with someone the other day, and they were like, I could tell they're just thinking about owning this home for like 10, 15 years. And I'm like, are you sure this isn't going to be your forever home? Like you're moving to New York City, you're a young couple. Who knows if you have kids? Who knows if your job will take you somewhere else? Why don't you consider the 7-year adjustable rate, where you can get literally like, she locked at 5.35%. I mean, that's a really great rate right now. And, and made that property more affordable. And so, those are the conversations that we as agents should be having with people. And I was just going to say, like, that I very much look at, it's sort of like we're setting up a team when we first start working with a buyer. New York is an attorney state. We have to have attorney. I don't know if you guys are, but attorneys draw up our contracts. Yeah, we have to have
out here. So we are not an attorney state. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have attorneys. Attorneys have to draw up the contract, and they become a big part of the process. And so we get that team in place at the beginning. We get your real estate attorney, we get your mortgage person, and we all have our different parts of the store. And the mortgage professionals that I like will really they're really generous with their time and take the time to sit down with us and figure out some strategies, like, or if it has to be like, we can't buy for another year. Okay, let's figure out what we have to do to get there,
Totally.
Because I agree, those conversations can be heartbreaking when someone's so excited, they're like, oh, we're ready, we have our down payment, and then they find out they really can't do it. But the best antidote for anxiety and despair is action.
Yes.
Planning.
And planning ahead before you think it seems to make sense. If it's a year out, it doesn't hurt to start talking to an agent and start getting connected with a mortgage professional that early. It seems ridiculous because it seems like it's a really long time. But one thing I've learned is that a year goes by so fast. And so fast. Sometimes, like, if you want to make the most of the opportunity to purchase, you want to be prepared. And so that's the time to have that mortgage broker look at your financial picture and say, if you do X, it can lead to this outcome that is favorable for you. It could mean you open up more buying power, could mean you qualify for a better interest rate. So things like that, gosh, just that planning ahead and taking those steps early can make a huge difference. And I always advocate for that. It's the what is it? The 5 Ps. Prior planning prevents poor performance, right? So right. that applies here, is that planning, like you said, is so important. And the dream team, for you, it's the lawyer, the agent, the mortgage broker. And then for us, it's the agent, the lender, title and escrow, and financial planner, advisor, your accountant, like all those people, getting those people behind you and advising you. It's important to assemble your dream team.
Yeah, never too early to start doing that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so often people, I preach it, and we don't get everything squared away early on, but they want to go out and look at some properties. So we're like, all right, fine. So let's go out and look at some properties. And sure enough, they fall in love with the property, and it's competitive here, and they're not in a position to move forward on this perfect home that they found. Yes. And they sometimes lose it because they weren't ready to go. And
yes,
preparation is the key to success.
Oh my gosh. And that happens so often. And that's the worst feeling. You fall in love with a property and you just put off getting your pre-approval. And then you're either scrambling and it doesn't happen in time, or you are not able to just walk in feeling super confident with your offer. And then you lose it because you're not looking at it in the full picture. And that's happened before too. And that's just as heartbreaking when you're cobbling something together and it's not the best position to be in, because you could overbid, or you know, there's lots of things that go wrong when all of a sudden it's like a crush to get something done, is not also a good feeling.
And you and as agents, how many times have you seen it? And you know, as an agent, when you walk in the door, you're like, oh no, this is it. This is the one. This is the one.
Yeah.
And then you just want to grab them and shake them and be like, listen, I told you, get that pre-approval.
Yes.
But
yes, 100%. It happens all the time. All the time. Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, there's always challenges, and challenges are different at different times, but I think that it comes down to a common theme, and I know you'll agree with this, which is it matters who you work with, and make sure that you are working with somebody who is going to have the patience and the knowledge to walk with you through these steps, and isn't just concerned about turning a sale and making a transaction, because that can be a challenge as well. It comes down to what's best for the clients and getting things done. And sometimes from agents coming to the clients, it could very well be a conversation of, you need to slow down and we need to do this the right way, because it is going to be better for you in the long run. So sometimes it means we have to tell you what you don't like to hear, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just,
exactly.
You want to make sure you have the best outcome, and advise you for the best, what's best for you. That's our fiduciary duty to you as a client. So, well, anything else you'd want to add to that, Tyson?
No, I think we've covered it all. This has been amazing.
Yeah.
Great time.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining with this conversation. Why don't you tell the people how they can find you if they want to know more about you and living in Brooklyn and New York City?
Well, if you type in my name, Tyson Lewis, TysonLewis, and Compass is the brokerage I work with, my name should come up at first, or at least pretty high in the Google search. My email is tyson.lewis@compass.com, and my Instagram is @TysonLewisRealEstate. That's probably the easiest. And I'm happy to help anyone or talk to anyone, even if there's nothing in it for me, even if I can't do it. I love helping other agents and being a great connector. Anything in the tri-state area, I have some great connections and I can help you out.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining. And I'm Jennifer Schurter. I cover the South Portland, Oregon metro suburbs. And if you're looking to make a move around this part of Oregon, I hope you'll look me up. Otherwise, follow or subscribe to my channel, Living in Portland Suburbs. Share this with someone you think might need to see it. And otherwise, we will look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good one, everyone.